Welcome to the next in our series on Headless CMS with Next.js. Today we're going to be focusing on React server components and client components and how you can decide when to use each, and a really cool thing called server actions, which are something that's built on top of server components, and how you can call that from a client component and how it all works together. But we can also look at using API routes if we want to load data inside our client component that we need to get after the page has load. That's primarily when you want to use a client component. We want to use a server component because it runs on the server and we can pre-render everything and do what's called static pre-rendering. And then a client component is all the client interactivity. And a lot of times when we're working with Next.js, we think about React components. And React components have a lot of front-end things that they can do. So if we have something like an infinite scroller, which we're going to show here, where it's going to be able to load infinitely through a list and pull the extra items from that list from the server, we want to load that into the client without reloading the whole page. Let's see how we can do that. So if you remember the site we've been working on through this series, we've got the starter site, the Next.js starter site from Agility CMS. That's what we're working through as an example. And what we're going to do is check out the blog listing page and see how that actually works. So let's go see what that looks like in preview, and then we'll dig into the code to find out how that's actually being implemented. So you can see there's three components on this page. We've got our heading component right here, our featured post component right there, but then we've got this post listing component, and it's showing our posts as cards, but then as we scroll through, it's infinitely loading more and more and more of them in as we go through. Now, these are not real posts because in the posts list that we've got in the CMS, we only shipped 3 posts, but we're kind of doing a fake loading here just to show, hey, what an infinite scroll can look like. We're going to keep on scrolling forever. Let's dig into the code to see how that's implemented in a React server component versus a client component. So inside the code, I'm just going to close everything to start here. And we'll jump into our components folder, and we have the way that I like to do it is I like to, when I'm doing a server component, I often will have a client component or more than one client component that's kind of linked with that, and sometimes they're paired one-to-one. In this case, I have a server component that I want to do some asynchronous data loading in, and then I have a client component that I want to do my infinite scrolling in. Let's look at the server component first. Now, all of the examples that we've been using so far and the component that we created last time with the carousel, that was a server component because it's async, and you can see we're using awaits in here. So we're actually doing our data loading. This can't work as of the current version of React. This can't run asynchronous. The components are all synchronous to load initially, right? So this is a server component. This is going to run only on the server. It will output HTML from, if I get down to where we're actually returning some stuff, this HTML is going to be rendered directly to my client as raw HTML, not as a component. So what the good thing here is that I'm not going to deliver a whole bunch of extra JavaScript for a server component. If you have only server components, then the amount of JavaScript that your Next.js website is going to deliver, this app is going to deliver to the client, is going to be a lot smaller than if we used client components everywhere. So, but you can see this is really just, all it's doing is calling this get post listing method that we've written here. All that method is doing, let's dig into it really quick. It's just calling our get content list and the get sitemap and trying to figure out what is the URL of each of these posts that we have in our list, okay? So we're hard coding the posts list. So in our CMS, just jump there real quick into the content area, we've got a list called posts right here, blog posts, right? So the reference name of that list is called posts. We only have 3 in that list. We're going to be simulating an infinite scroll with that in our code. So we're going to resolve the post URLs using some of the stuff that Agility CMS has in the background, but then we're going to return this iPostMin interface right here. So what we're going to do is actually map these posts, which have quite a bit of data in them. We're going to map that to a much smaller return. Okay, so we're not going to output all of the post content. We're just going to send out the ID, the title, date, URL, category, and image. So a much smaller data load which is going to limit when we actually return this to the client, we're not going to be sending as much through. So in a server component, not as big a deal here. We could also use a GraphQL. I'll probably do a later post on a later video on using GraphQL in here. This is using the REST API. So we're going to return a much smaller post version into our server component for the initial sort of screen of posts. And that's really important because we want that to load really fast. We don't want to have to do a second call to the client to get that initial load. All right. We're gonna if we don't have any posts, we're gonna show just a hey, no posts available, return home. We could have put this label in the CMS, but we didn't right now. That's not really our concern. But then you can see we're not actually outputting a lot the posts from the server here. We're outputting them 100% from the client. So let's actually dig into this client component and see how that works. Now there's a special sort of piece of text we'll put here at the top of this component called use client. This is going to tell Next.js that this is not a server component. And if we declared this as async, and that's one thing to watch for, if you have a client component that you declare as async, you're going to get errors galore. So make sure that you don't do that. And what we've done is we've passed the list of posts that we got from the server component, we passed that directly into here as a prop. So that's going to come through, and that will come through both this is going to render on the server. So the initial output of this client component will render as pure HTML, but then we'll also get the ability for this to rehydrate. So it'll rehydrate as a little mini React app that we can actually use to render we have this we're using React Infinite Scroll component here, okay? So that's really important for us to understand how that works, all right? And I'm not going to look at the alternate fetching yet. We'll just look at the initial React setup. So what we're going to return here is essentially this infinite scroll. We're going to wrap our post, where we're going to map through the post items here. So we'll get to this in a second. But now we're just mapping through the posts, looping through these, and each one is going to be wrapped in a link. And then we're outputting either an image or an agility pick. Now we've got some stuff here because I'm using placeholder.co to do my simulated scrolling. So we're just going to use an image for that. But then we're using the agility pick component. This is going to be nice because it gives us a bunch of different is used as a picture tag with a bunch of different image sources based on media queries here. So this is nice to look at here to sort of understand how we're trying to make our rendering as efficient as possible. And then we're just doing straight up React templating here with our category, date, and title. All right, so very, very basic setup here. Notice we are using the link tag to actually link to the post details from here. Okay, now let's look at how we're actually loading that after. So let's just run this first, okay, to see how it works. So I have here, I'm on localhost 3000. Let's jump to the blog page, and then I'm just going to scroll. And you'll see that once I get through the initial 3, then I start getting these simulated posts coming through. Now let's actually just view our inspector here and look at our network tab and see how that's actually working. So let's refresh. All right, so you can see here, it already loaded in the first page of extras, and it called /blog. So what Next.js is doing is it's calling the same URL, but it's calling it with a post. All right, so this is the server action I was talking about. And it's sending this kind of encoded message here with 2 arguments, and it has the skip and the take. So I want to skip the first 3 that we saw, and I want to get the next 10, right? So let's look at how that is actually working. That's called a React server action. This infinite scroll component has this has more method that we need to implement. And we've implemented with the same name. So it has the has more, so that's a property. But then we've got the next method that we implement, and I called it fetch posts. All right. So this has more is telling the infinite loader, do we have more to load? And then we've got this items list that's a state variable that we're going to be working with. So this is straight up just regular React stuff. What's not regular is how we're doing this loading. So what happened is we actually passed a method from the server component into our client component called getNextPosts, and it has properties for skip and take. So we want to skip wherever we're at and get the next set of posts. And we can just call that method. And the skip is going to be how many items do we already have in our list. So skip, we're at the end. And then we're going to hard code 10. We're going to get 10 as a set. And you could play with these variables yourself. And then we're just going to literally just use a set state method to update how many how many posts are in that list. And then if we didn't get any posts back, then we'll set has more equal false. But if we do have more posts coming back, then we're going to set it to be true. Okay. So in our simulation, let's look at how that's actually working. Jumping back to the server component now, this is the method that I collapsed when we started. I decorated this method. This is an async method with use server. So this is going to run on the server, and this is how Next.js is going to rig this up, because this component is on our /blog page. So all Next.js is going to do is send in that encoded sort of post, and then it's going to figure out how to call this for us with the parameters that we've set up. So that's really cool. But let's see how it's implemented as well. We're going to call our same get post listing that we called up here. Now remember, this isn't being called in the initial load. This is being called after the fact from a client event, still running on the server though, okay? And in this case, if we didn't get anything back from there, then we're going to jump down to here, and we're going to build a phantom post list, just some example stuff. So normally with a normal list of posts, you would just use this, but we wanted to simulate the infinite loading. So this is just a hack. By the way, I recommend probably setting up something in your DevOps so that if you have /hack in there, that it won't compile for you. But in this case, we're going to let it go. So we're going to build our phantom list of posts here with just using a loop to just build these. So we're always going to get 10 that responded back. So let's look at that one more time to kind of see what happens. So when we scroll through here, every time we get to the next set of where we don't have any more, we're at the end of our list, it's going to load this again. So here we skipped 3 and took 10. Now we're going to skip 13, take another 10. So you can see how that's a really nice way to kind of infinitely scroll through these, right? And we can see how the count just increments as we keep looping through, right? Now that's one way to do it. But the problem here is that these are posts, and posts are notoriously hard to cache. So I would normally not recommend a server action to do something that's really a get. If we're going to be submitting form data, I think a server action is perfect. But if we're doing a get, we should probably look at using an API route for that. So let's look at using an API server route to actually do pretty much exact same thing, but put it in a different place. So what we've done is in our API folder, we've got another folder called post listing, and then a route.ts underneath of that. So everything with Next.js app router is folders. And then the name of what's going to actually be in there is our route.ts, okay? So the path for this will be /API/post-listing. And we're going to use search parameters for this because this is going to be a get, right? We're only going to pull a get here, so this can be cached much more easily. We're going to pull in what sitemap we're in, what's the locale, and our skip and take. These are the 2 parameters that we really need to care about. We're going to parse those into ints, and then we're going to just call get post listing again. And then I've got the same hack that we had previously to build our phantom post lists. In a production site, obviously, again, we wouldn't have this. We're just going to, and then build that list of 10 phantom posts, and then literally just return that straight as JSON out. Okay, so let's go back into our client component now and instead of calling our server action, we're going to call fetch. So we're going to build our URL. So API/post listing, we have query strings for our sitemap, the locale, skip, and take. So skip is just the current set of items. How long is it? So we're going to skip to the end of the list. And then our more posts now is just this, the JSON that we got back from fetch. Okay, so we're going to call fetch. And then we're going to set that into the exact same logic there. So let's save that, refresh our page over here. So let's scroll to the top. All right, so we don't have anything loaded yet. Let's clear the console. Let's just scroll down and see what happens now. So you can see it's calling our post listing, and it's a get. And the URL has all of this in it. So we're getting the exact same preview, the same response, right? We're getting these 10 posts that come back, and this is where we want it to be very, we didn't want to have a lot of content in there. That's why we used a minimum version of that post that came back from our REST API. And now this is just going to, every time we get through the next 10, it's going to load it again. So you can see that we're doing the exact same thing, but this is in a much more efficient way where we're going to get better performance through Next.js. So that's a little insight into how we can use server components, client components, server actions, and then API routes to kind of tie this together when we have something like we're paging through a list, or we do anything where we need to pull data after this page has initially loaded. We want to go get some data from the server to render. And you can do this for a lot of different functionality pieces. It's great for things like carts. When you have like a shopping cart, you want to load that in. When you have user profile information, we don't want to load that in the initial load of the page. We want to pull that after. Now, there's some other techniques called partial pre-rendering and some other things that you may have heard of with Next.js, but this is a really standard way to kind of use a client component to pull in data after the fact. So that's React Server components and client components in a Next.js website with Headless CMS. Hope you learned a lot here. There's going to be lots more videos in this series. Stay tuned.